when I was a young youth minister, I helped lead a couple trips down to Mexico, and we went down and we built houses. And we took people with us that knew what they were doing, which is really good, because at that time especially, I had no idea the first thing about building a house or working on a house. And so we took people with us that knew what they were doing. And even to this day, I've learned a little bit more about building things and fixing things. But still, I go into Home Depot and I have a lot of people with orange aprons coming up to me asking if I need help. And it feels like it goes beyond the normal amount of customer service, and it's really me just kind of, maybe it's the day's look on my face. They see me and they go, that guy has no idea what he's doing. We better help him before he cuts his finger off or something. And so I always have lots of help. But anyway, when we were in Mexico, we built houses, and we would spend a lot of time on one part of the house, and that's the foundation. It was really important that as we followed along with the plans that were given to us, that the foundation be solid, that it be level, that it be squared away. And the thing is, the ground we were building on was none of those things. And so we had to spend a lot of time digging to get the ground ready, and then a lot of time measuring and working with that foundation. And it kind of got a little bit tedious, honestly, because we were all excited to build the actual walls and roof and move on to that part of the house. And so it got a little bit tedious as we were working on this foundation. But we knew that that's important, because if the foundation isn't good, then the house isn't going to stand up straight, and it might not stand up at all, right? And so the foundation, we know this, even if you're not a builder type person, you know the foundation of the building is important because it determines the success of the building. All right, so today is the final week of an 11-week journey through the Sermon on the Mount. This is Jesus' most famous teaching, and we've spent 11 weeks. And when we started this back at the beginning of March, we had no idea the disruption that we were going to be facing that's come from this coronavirus crisis. And here we are. As a church, we've had to adapt. We've had to learn new things. We've just had challenges like we've never thought we would have. And at the beginning of this journey, I made the claim that we need Jesus to teach us how to live countercultural lives. I made that claim. I also made this claim. Our world needs a countercultural church. Maybe doesn't realize it needs that, but here's a group of people that is living counter to the culture. That's what the world really needs. That's what the world is really longing for. And I just think, isn't that true now more than it ever was even before this crisis? If this crisis has taught us anything, it's how just vulnerable we are and how fragile it all is. And we can't really put our trust in those same things that we used to put our trust in. Health, government officials, financial investments. I mean, I used to put my trust in Starbucks being open, and I can't do that anymore, right? So it could all just end, it could all collapse in a moment. So we can't put our trust in those things. We can't have any of those things be the foundation that we build our lives on. So as we've seen, the foundation determines the success of the building. And I will also tell you what we build our lives on determines the success of our lives. So today, we're going to look at the final words of Jesus' sermon. And Jesus is talking about foundations. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about what we choose to build our lives on. So it turns out we have a choice of what we build our life on. So we're going to be Matthew chapter 7 today, and we're going to start in verse 24. This is what it says. It says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine," Jesus says, "and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." Now, this passage has become so famous that they made a song, right? And it's sung by kids in churches everywhere. I don't know. I grew up in the church, in church, and so I sang this song a lot. I don't know about you, but it's, the wise man built his house upon the rock, and his house stands firm. And then the foolish man built his house on the sand, and at the end, his house goes splat. Right? That's how the song ends. And I remember as a kid really loving that part when the foolish man's house collapses. And of course, as boys, those of you who have boys know that boys come with built-in sound effects, right? You don't even have to put batteries in them; they just come that way. And of course, when we sang it, the house didn't always go splat. Sometimes the house just exploded, right? The house on the sand went, and there's all kinds of just crazy things happening. But that's that's how it goes. But this is what's so great about Jesus' teachings is they're so vivid, right? There's so many pictures. Now, sometimes Jesus' teachings are a little bit hard to understand, and we kind of read it and we go, not really sure what he's trying to say there. Most of the time, though, Jesus' teachings are uncomfortably clear, right? They're like super vivid. And so I just wanted to point out a couple of things that we've gone over here, because Jesus was a master teacher. And this has been a journey through this sermon. And here's some of the images that Jesus has used. I just made a quick list. He says, you are salt and light in a world that is decaying and dark. He says, turn the other cheek. When people attack you, he says, don't store your treasure on earth, store your treasure in heaven. Right? Jesus says that God cares for birds and flowers. He gives birds the food they need, and he gives flowers, he clothes the flowers. So he's going to take care of you in the same way. Talking about hypocrisy, Jesus says, take the plank out of your eye before you try to remove a speck of sawdust from your brother's eye or your friend's eye. That's a pretty vivid image. He says, God is like a good parent. He says, if you pray to God, when you pray to God, it's like you parents, you're not going to give your kid a rock if they ask for some bread, right? So God's the same way. He is a good parent. Jesus says the road to life is narrow and the gate is small, but the road to destruction is wide and the gate to that road is big. And then he says, the bad tree cannot bear good fruit and a good tree cannot bear bad fruit. Talking about how what comes out in our lives and our actions is what is in our hearts. So the inside is what affects the outside. So if you think about, those are some amazing images, and those are just a few of the images that we've seen. So you see how these stick in your mind and they kind of change your perspective. And all of a sudden, Jesus is challenging your perspective and you have a countercultural view now of the world. And we need this perspective. We've already talked about this. The world needs it, and we need Jesus to teach us how to live. In this story, the wind and the rain and the floods come and they beat against the house. And both of the houses experience the same thing, the same weather, the same conditions. One stands firm and the other one collapses, Jesus says, with a loud crash. So what's the difference between these two houses? It's the foundation, because one is built on the solid rock and one is built on the shifting foundation of sand. So what's the principle that Jesus is trying to get across? He's saying we need to build our lives on a firm foundation, and that firm foundation is the teachings of Jesus. But Jesus makes it clear that it's not just the teachings, okay, that are the foundation. There's more to it than that. Look at verse 24. It says, therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Right? So this is about applying Jesus' teachings. This is about hearing the words of Jesus and putting them into practice. This is about obedience to the teachings of Jesus. Here's what Jesus is saying in a nutshell. He's saying this. He's saying if we put the teachings of Jesus into practice in our lives, then we are building our lives on a firm foundation. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward, right? This foundation is a rock-solid foundation. It can withstand anything that life throws at it. If you think about it, isn't this what every person really wants? To be so grounded that the storms of life can't ruin you. And as we've seen, everything in our lives can change in a matter of days. We have no way of predicting what will happen next. The future is out of our control. So wouldn't you like to be prepared, rooted, grounded, no matter what comes in your life? Don't we want to have that? Author Dallas Willard talks about what this kind of life looks like. He talks about it in The Divine Conspiracy, which is an amazing book. I just want to read this to you because it's so good. He says, certainly life on the rock must be a good way to live. He says, wouldn't you like to be one of those intelligent people who know how to live a rich and unshakable life? One free from loneliness, fear, and anxiety, and one filled with constant peace and joy? Would you like to love your neighbors as you do yourself and be free of anger, envy, lust, and covetousness? Would you like to have no need for others to praise you? And would you like to not be paralyzed and humiliated by their dislike and their condemnation? Would you like to have the inspiration and strength to lead a constant life of creative goodness? Sounds pretty good thus far, doesn't it? But then he goes on and he takes it to the next level. He says, wouldn't you also like to have a strength and understanding that enables you to bless those who are cursing you or cheating you or beating you out on the job or spitting on you in a confrontation, laughing at your religion or culture, or even killing you? Or the strength and understanding to give further needed assistance to someone who has actually forced you to drop everything to help you or to help them? And to offer the other cheek to someone who has slapped you. He says this is how he ends. He says, clearly our entire inner reality of thought and feeling would have to be transformed in order to bring us to such a place. But this is what Jesus is talking about here. He's talking about an abundant, blessed life, a truly amazing life. But here's the thing. That abundant life, it comes from leading an obedient life to Jesus. Jesus is saying that this blessing and the security that comes from being built on this foundation, it comes from obedience to Jesus. There's a connection, you see, between abundance and obedience in our lives. But we want the abundance from Jesus without the obedience to Jesus. Notice that following Jesus, that building your life on Jesus doesn't mean that the troubles disappear from your life. That's not what Jesus is promising here. The houses, both houses experience the same thing, the same wind, the same rain, the same floods. But building your life on Jesus does mean you have a foundation that can stand up to anything. This isn't about your stamina or your endurance. Okay, this is about the enduring and steadfast teachings of Jesus. Because we fail, we fall, we come up empty, come up short all the time, but Jesus and his teachings will never fail. So, what does it look like then to build our lives on the teachings of Jesus? And to answer that question, what I want to do is I want to look at the same illustration here, but I want to look at it in Luke, the book of Luke, instead of Matthew. It's in Luke chapter 6. And by the way, I really just think it's such a blessing to have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 4 gospels, 4 perspectives on Jesus instead of just one. And some of them tell the same stories as each other, but they often have different details. And it's kind of interesting to see what details are included in one versus the other. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at Luke 6, starting in verse 46. We're going to see if there's any details that jump out at us here that are different. First of all, Jesus says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. And when a flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it, because it was well built. The one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. And the moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed, and its destruction was complete." Now, Jesus begins by pointing out this painfully obvious statement, right? He says, "Why do you call me Lord of your life if you're not willing to do what I say?" And we looked at this verse last week when we talked about real versus fake discipleship. And if you want to hear that message, it's on our app, it's on our website, it's on Facebook. And we looked at this verse, and Jesus says, "Why do you call me Lord of your life if you aren't willing to do what I say?" And it's like, ouch, that's a good point, Jesus. How many of us are willing to wear the name of Christian, but we're not willing to, when it comes to the harder teachings of Jesus, we're not willing to follow him? Yes, Jesus, you are Lord of my life. But then it's like, oh, but you want me to trust my wealth to God? Oh man, you want me to love my enemies? You want me to give my life to serving others? You want me to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and visit criminals and love the unlovely and pray for those who persecute me? I mean, is there like a loophole? Can we pick and choose which ones we follow and which ones we don't? But that's what Jesus is saying. He's like, no. If you're going to call me Lord of your life, you need to do what I say. If we're going to call Jesus Lord of our life, we need to do what he says. So, what does it look like to do this? Notice what Jesus says in verses 47 and 48. It says, as for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house but could not shake it because it was well built. Now, this was a new detail for me. For a long time, when I heard this illustration, I imagined the wise and the foolish builders. They're both setting out to build their house. And they come up and there's some sand right here, and then there's a rock over here. And the foolish man's like, well, yeah, I know there's a rock right there, but I'm just going to build my house in the sand. It's like, that is foolish, right? But then the wise builder comes along, and there's a perfectly good rock right there, and he's like, awesome, a rock for me to build my house on, score, right? That's what I always imagined. I don't know about you, but that's not what happened, all right? What happens, this is a more accurate picture with some really good graphics here, right? The two builders show up, and it's all sand. There's only sand, all right? And the foolish builder, he just puts his house right on top of the sand. But the other builder is willing to dig. And so Jesus says this builder, he actually dug down deep, down to the rock, and that's what he builds his house on. The difference between these two builders is one is willing to dig and the other isn't, all right? Which leads me to say this. We need to be willing to dig deep if we're going to build our life on Jesus Christ. And one other detail I love in this is Jesus says, the moment the wind starts, it's like there's a little puff of wind and the house just collapses, the one on the sand. I think that's a great detail. Jesus is so vivid. He's not afraid to exaggerate a little bit just to drive it home. And so what does this look like? I just want to give you some very practical just tips, ideas about what does it look like to dig deep and build your life on Jesus. Okay, but first, I just want to review what we've talked about so far. Okay, so first of all, if we put the teachings of Jesus into practice in our lives, then we're building our lives on a firm foundation. And then abundance and obedience are connected. That secure life, that blessed life. Okay, and then if you're going to call Jesus Lord of your life, you need to do what he says. And finally, we need to be willing to do the hard work and dig deep if we're going to build our life on Jesus. You see what Jesus is getting at here. All right, so in light of all that, here's my challenge, and that is make the decision to build your life on Jesus. If you've never taken the time to really get established in your faith, it's time to do that. Beginning today, you could fall more in love with Jesus than you ever have before. And you will worship God with more passion, and you will love people with more compassion, and you will read the Bible with more expectation and more joy and more excitement, because your life will be built on the foundation of Jesus. So how do you do this? How do you begin to get more established in your faith, and how do you dig deep? Well, here's the thing. Everyone's journey in following Jesus is different. Every person is different. So I really don't like to give cookie cutter ideas about discipleship to people. Okay? But I think there's one step that's universal. I think there's one idea that applies to everyone, and that's this. Get to know Jesus by reading about Jesus and talking with Jesus. Okay, sorry if you were expecting something more groundbreaking than that, but that's the step. All right, we talked about this last week as well when we talked about deciding, asking, and dwelling as a disciple of Jesus. So I just want to continue this theme here today. Get to know Jesus by reading about him and talking with him. It's pretty straightforward. Now, even though it's straightforward, I think you'd be amazed how many Christians, they don't take this elementary step. And I think that's why we have so many Christians who are willing to call Jesus Lord, but they're not willing to do what he says. Christians today in America, we have more access to the Bible in more formats and more versions than any Christians living anywhere ever. And it's actually a little bit, I'm ashamed because I see our brothers and sisters who live around the world who maybe don't have the Bible in their language, or they don't have the whole Bible in their language. And as disciples, I mean, they follow Jesus on a whole nother level. But we have so much access to Scripture, and because we do, let me break this down as simply as possible. Read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Read them a little bit each day, or you can listen to them. You can download the YouVersion app, and there's audio Bibles, and there's all kinds of different versions in there. And you can go on YouTube to listen to the Bible. You could get a hold of an audio Bible if you don't want to read. You can listen in the car on your way to work. So read or listen to the Gospels a little each day, and then this is the important part, write down observations. Now, if you're driving, you might want to wait till you get where you're going before you write stuff down. But let me give you some things to kind of look for. Really simple. What's Jesus doing when you read the Gospels? What's he saying? Is there anything he's doing where you need to follow that example? Is there anything he's saying that you need to do? Okay, you see how simple this is and how straightforward this is? Now, that's the first part of getting to know Jesus. The second part is talking with Jesus. Now, you might have noticed that I'm intentionally avoiding using the word prayer because prayer is an intimidating word. It's a loaded word for people. When I talk about prayer, a lot of times people go, I don't know how to pray. I'm not good at that. I'm not good at prayer. But we all know how to talk to people, right? We're supposed to pray with boldness and honesty before God. Now, Jesus talks about prayer in the Sermon on the Mount. He talks about it a couple different times, and we looked at that. We saw that it's asking God, it's seeking God, it's having this conversation with God, and we overcomplicate it. Prayer is supposed to be a conversation with God. Now, a reverent, respectful conversation for sure, but a conversation nonetheless, right? So read about Jesus and then talk with Jesus to get to know him, to get to know Jesus. And by the way, this activity is good for people who are new in their faith. It's also good for people who've been Christians for a long time. You don't ever graduate from this, right? And don't assume just because you've been a Christian for a long time that you've learned all there is to know about Jesus, all right? Jesus is the expert. This is what he's good at. He's good at challenging our thinking. He's good at challenging those deeply held views that we hang on to about the world and about God. So if you're a believer, you've been a believer for a while, and it's been a while since Jesus has just absolutely blown your mind and absolutely given you a totally different perspective on God or on the world, then I just encourage you, take these steps and get ready for Jesus to blow your mind. If you're here today and you're not a believer, maybe you're not sure about this whole Jesus thing, you're just kind of here to check things out. Listen, we're so glad that you're here. I have the similar challenge for you, but it's a little bit different. If you're really serious about seeking the truth, maybe that's why you're here, you're seeking the truth. Decide today to really dig into what it is that you believe, especially what you believe about Jesus. Decide today to really seek out that truth. And you can talk to me, you can talk to one of our elders, one of our staff. We would love to talk with you. Listen, I know for sure, not probably, we don't have all the answers, okay? But this is a journey, and we'd love to be on that journey with you. Jesus made this crazy claim that he is the truth. He said, I am the truth, which means that any real, honest search for truth can only end in one place, and that's Jesus. So I have confidence that if you really seek the truth, that you will find Jesus. I've been praying that as a church, that we would seek Jesus like never before, that we would live for him like never before, and that we would see Jesus impact this community around us like never before. At the very end of Matthew chapter 7, it says this. This is how the Sermon on the Mount ends. It says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. Imagine if we were totally captivated by Jesus' teachings and we actually lived them out. Imagine if Jesus had authority in every aspect of our lives and he was transforming us. Your obedience, imagine your obedience to Jesus resulting in abundant life in Jesus. Imagine that. It begins with you and me, each of us taking this step, this challenge to dig down deep and to build our lives on Jesus. Let's pray.